You're nothing but a parasite living off the $9,000 I make every month. My husband's yelling drained the blood from my face in an instant. With that one sentence, the happy days I cherished crumbled like a lie. I clenched my trembling hands tightly on my lap. In our 3 years of marriage, I had never heard such cruel words. I was 3 months pregnant at the time, but his gaze toward me was cold as if I were a stranger. That's right, you're just a leech living off my son's hard-earned money. Her voice echoed painfully in my ears. Even as my vision blurred from exhaustion, I had struggled to keep smiling while preparing meals for 19 family members this new year. Not a single person had shown any concern for me as I stood working since morning. Tears welled up as I realized that all the relationships I had built were worth no more than this. Still, I refused to let them see me cry. Jason suddenly stood up, towering over me. Dinner is terrible as always, and you embarrassed me in front of everyone again. He slammed his hand on the table. The jolt made me flinch. My heart ached from disappointment in him and pity for myself. Can't afford to get divorced? Then you better start doing housework worth $9,000 a month. As her mocking laughter filled the room, I silently stared at the floor. Maybe if I had handled things better, I could have avoided this situation. Jason's footsteps approached and stopped right above me. His presence felt heavy, crushing me under its weight. So what's it going to be? Are you going to keep crawling like a pathetic worm, or what? His demand for an answer made me quietly close my eyes. From deep within my heart, a small yet firm resolve began to rise. I took a deep breath and turned to face him. My name is Lydia Green, and I'm 28 years old. I'm currently 3 months pregnant. This is my first pregnancy, and each day I'm nervous about the changes in my body. I met my husband a few years ago through a mutual friend. My college friend and I were having lunch when my husband and his friend happened to be at the same restaurant. We ended up eating together, and that's how it all began. During our conversation, I learned he was serious about finding a life partner, even using dating apps and marriage agencies frequently. He wasn't bad looking and worked at a reputable company. I was curious why he was so desperate to find a wife, so I dug deeper. He told me he was looking for someone with high standards who valued family above all else. I grew up surrounded by my parents' love, so I completely understood the importance of valuing family. My mom and dad always respected my opinions and supported me wholeheartedly whenever I needed them. Watching them, I grew up wanting to create the same kind of family. Family is about supporting each other. I had always carried that belief. Jason, I totally agree with your perspective on family. It's exactly the kind of family I want for myself one day. When I said that, his eyes lit up. Lydia, I've never met someone whose values align with mine so well. Please tell me more. From there, he pursued me earnestly and we began dating. He was good at his job and fun to talk to. However, even while dating, he often brought up his mother and talked about her endlessly. Still, I knew from the start that he was family-oriented, and I assumed that once we got married, his focus would shift to me and our future children. By the second year of our relationship, we both began to seriously consider marriage. We arranged to meet each other's families, and I was nervous about meeting his mother for the first time. The day of the meeting, I was shown into their family's sitting room, and we exchanged greetings before a friendly conversation began. As I had heard, Jason and his mother, Martha, were very close, and our conversation proceeded with me joining in on their lively chatter. The atmosphere was pleasant, but the moment Jason excused himself to use the restroom, Martha's expression changed. Lydia, I heard you plan to become a housewife after you get married. Jason will be working so hard while you just sit around doing nothing. Living completely off my son's income? That's awfully presumptuous of you. Her friendly demeanor from earlier seemed like a mask, replaced by a completely different, hostile expression. Her terrifying gaze froze me in place. Becoming a housewife wasn't my idea, it was Jason's preference. I'd wanted to work and contribute financially, but Jason insisted, I want you to take care of the home. My ideal is coming home to a clean house every day with dinner ready. Just as I was about to explain this to her, Jason returned at the perfect moment. Immediately, her face transformed again as she cozied up to Jason. The two of them launched into another lively conversation, leaving me on the sidelines. My parents had always taught me to stand firm in my opinions. That's why her overbearing attitude felt so deeply unsettling. But I decided to hold my tongue, thinking it would only ruin the mood if I spoke up. Martha lived off the inheritance left behind by her late husband. I couldn't understand why she was so against me being a housewife. Perhaps it was the idea of living off her son's earnings that irked her. In any case, it seemed ridiculous to let this jeopardize our marriage. I reassured myself that as long as we didn't live together, I could endure seeing her just a few times a year at family gatherings. Despite my unease, I decided to go through with the marriage. Martha has spent years living a carefree life off the inheritance left by her late husband. She was generous with money and used it to control those around her. People weren't friendly with her because they enjoyed her company or felt at ease around her. They stayed on her good side out of fear, worried about the consequences of crossing her. On the surface, she wore a pleasant mask, but behind closed doors, her behavior was downright demonic. Her sense of self-importance had grown over the years. A few months after our wedding, Jason dropped a bombshell over dinner. "Starting next month, Mom's moving in with us. Hope that's okay." He said it so casually that I nearly spit out my soup. "What? Why? You never mentioned this. I can't handle that. You have to tell her no." I desperately protested. I called the ugly side of Martha that she had shown me before the wedding. Even now, the thought of living with her made me shudder. There was no way it could work. Mom says she really wants to live with me. She deserves that, doesn't she? She's always been so good to me, so it's time for me to do something for her in return. "How could you be against something like that?" Jason said this firmly before leaving the table. Left alone, I stared blankly into space, overwhelmed by a sense of despair and unsure of what to do. In times like these, I would usually turn to my parents for advice. But here I was, only a few months into my marriage, already facing such a massive issue. I didn't want to worry my parents, who had been so happy about my marriage, so I resolved to handle this on my own. I thought maybe before the wedding, Martha was just testing me to see what kind of person I was. I tried to stay positive, thinking that Jason would surely support me if things got tough. And then the day came when Martha moved in. I've been looking forward to this for months. "I'll take whatever room you have, even a storage closet is fine." She greeted Jason with a sweet, humble demeanor. "Don't be silly, Mom. You'll have the biggest, sunniest guest room in the house. Treat it like your own home. No need to hold back." Watching Jason respond so gently, I felt a chill run down my spine. Just before Martha arrived, Jason had taken a call from one of his subordinates and lashed out at them with harsh words. Even as an uninvolved listener, his cold and inconsiderate tone made my chest ache. There was no need for him to speak that way. I frowned quietly to myself, but the moment he saw Martha, he transformed into a completely obedient and sweet son. The stark difference in his behavior was terrifying. On weekdays, as soon as Jason left for work, I would start on the household chores, but Martha would constantly interfere. "Lydia, don't make so much noise when washing the dishes. And about your meals, they're too salty. You can't even make proper stock. I can't believe someone like you is actually married to my precious son." Poor Jason. She relentlessly criticized me. At first, her complaints and snide remarks were reserved for when Jason wasn't around, but eventually she began saying them in front of him too. Being a housewife must be so easy. You laze around and still manage to cut corners. Soon, Jason started agreeing with her and joined in criticizing me. I had been eager to have children, but the stress caused me to fall ill repeatedly, leaving me unable to get out of bed on some days. When Martha and Jason found out, they said, "You're just slacking off. Stop being lazy." Each day was unbearable, but with both of them ganging up on me, I couldn't say a word in my defense. No matter how sick I was the only one with a driver's license, so they constantly ordered me to drive them on long shopping trips during the weekends. Carrying the heavy groceries back to the car was also my job. After checking out, they would both head back to the car, saying they were too tired. No matter how hot it was, or if it was pouring rain, I had to make multiple trips between the store and the car alone. The reason for buying such large amounts of groceries every time was Martha. Martha frequently hosted gatherings for her circle of relatives, so I always had to prepare homemade meals, drinks, desserts, and snacks to accommodate everyone. All the preparation and cleanup fell solely on me, however. I wondered why anyone would willingly gather around someone like her, so I discreetly listened in and discovered they were all after her inheritance. One relative, Carol, was especially desperate. Recently divorced and financially struggling, she had borrowed large sums from Martha. Carol's son, Noah, often accompanied her on these visits. They would go on and on about how hard their lives were and then borrow more money from Martha. Noah had once worked for a good company but had left after struggling with mental health issues. Since then, he had been clinging to his mother, Carol. Because they owed her so much money, Martha was especially harsh toward them. The relatives, eager to stay on her good side, went along with her unreasonable demands toward me. Sometimes they even mimicked her by making snide comments or overworking me. These days repeated endlessly, and I lost sight of my purpose and self-worth, sinking into a depressive fog. In search of solace, I started an anonymous blog. At first, I vented about Martha and Jason, but gradually it evolved into a record of my household tasks and cooking. Soon, comments of empathy from other lonely housewives began pouring in, and for the first time, I found a space where I could rediscover my worth. As my readership grew, I began earning around $2,000 a month in ad revenue. Starting to post on social media brought even more stability to my income. This income became a safety net, a source of strength for me. If I told Martha or Jason about the blog, they would just tell me to stop and focus on housework, so I kept it completely secret, something only I knew about. Time passed, and 3 years into our marriage, I finally found out I was pregnant. I vowed to protect this child from the kind of emotional abuse I had endured. Jason was overjoyed when I first told him the news, but his attitude toward me didn't change. In fact, he began demanding even more, dismissing my pregnancy as an excuse. These days, women have it so easy. You act so entitled just because you're pregnant. Back in my day, we never would have dreamed of such a thing. Kids these days are way too soft. She looked at me with utter contempt. Even during the worst of my morning sickness in the early stages, Martha would say things like this. Oh, please, stop bluffing. It's normal to have some morning sickness in the beginning. If you want sympathy, start by showing some to me first. With that, she relentlessly tormented me. If things stayed as they were, both I and my unborn child would be controlled by her and live in misery. Realizing this, I began to seriously consider divorce. To prepare for the day I might leave, I stored a blank divorce form in the back of a drawer. For the sake of my child, I decided to start documenting everything happening at home to strengthen my resolve. I meticulously recorded Martha's and Jason's verbal abuse, capturing it on audio and video. I also visited a free legal clinic and consulted with a lawyer to ensure my records would hold up as evidence. My blog, The Frustrations of a Lonely Housewife, continued to gain momentum. Its views, followers, and revenue were all steadily climbing. It was linked to my social media accounts, and I was increasingly being recognized as an influencer across generations. Since I never revealed my face or real name, no one knew I was the person behind it all. What mattered most to me wasn't the recognition, but creating a space that offered comfort to others. I wanted this to be a second home for my followers. That alone kept me going. Then out of the blue, I received an offer from a publisher to turn my blog into a book. On top of that, several food companies approached me to develop recipes for them. Sensing this was my chance to change my life, I immediately said yes. Thankfully, they decided to publish both a printed and digital edition, which meant a steady stream of royalties. This eased some of my anxieties about the future. Whenever Jason or Martha acted overbearing, my heart would pound and my belly would tighten. After enduring such days, this news brought a much-needed brightness to my heart. I gently stroked my belly and spoke to my baby. Mommy's going to do her best to protect you. Let's find happiness together, okay? Between the blog, social media, and recipe development, my monthly income had reached about $3,500. That would be more than enough for me and my child to get by. I knew the time to make my decision was drawing near. And then something major happened. Every New Year's, we had gathered at Martha's house. But this year, she unilaterally decided it would be at our place and informed everyone without asking me. I was only in the early stages of my pregnancy, still battling morning sickness, and now dealing with back pain that left me unable to move freely. Can we at least cater some of the food? When I asked this, Martha flat out refused. What? Are you seriously planning to serve store-bought food to my family? You're going to make everything yourself. You're just a housewife with nothing else to do, so it's perfect. With no other choice, I handled everything, shopping, prep, cooking, and plating, all by myself. But I couldn't keep up with everything, and whenever the relatives made additional requests, it took up even more time. The long hours standing pushed my back to its limit, and my belly tightened painfully, forcing me to take frequent breaks. Meanwhile, Martha sat at the head of the table, not lifting a finger as others waited on her. Jason didn't even join the gathering. He just sat in the living room staring at the TV. The relatives knew that criticizing me would please Martha, so they began complaining one after another. The tea's a bit too hot. The way you plated these snacks is so sloppy. It really makes me question your character. They picked up on the smallest things and continued to criticize me relentlessly. Everyone knew I was pregnant, yet no one showed the slightest concern for me. I had been on my feet since morning, barely able to drink water, and I felt like I might collapse from nausea and exhaustion. I asked the relatives sitting nearby if I could sit or just a moment to catch my breath, but Jason spotted me immediately and began yelling. Hey, can't you even properly host my mom and our relatives? You do absolutely nothing except living off the $9,000 I earn every month, just like a parasite. He hurled those humiliating words at me. A parasite? Is that what I am to you? A parasite? No matter how cruel Martha or the relatives were to me, I had always been able to rationalize it by thinking that's just the way they are. But Jason was different. Where was the man who had once said he cherished family above all else? I thought back to the smile on his face when he promised to love and care for me, and tears threatened to spill. But another thought began to form in my mind. No, to him, the only family worth cherishing is his mother. His mother's will was paramount. Always prioritizing her over everything else had led to the words he spoke now. Those words were his true feelings. Realizing this, something inside me shattered. So the child I'm carrying isn't even part of your family to you, is it? As I sat there in shock, Martha chimed in. Thinking about divorce? Unless you can do $9,000 worth of housework, you're staying right here. Come on, no time to rest. As Martha mocked me, the relatives around her joined in with derisive laughter. That sounds like a whole lot of housework. A parasite, what a great comparison. The room erupted into laughter. I stared at each of their laughing faces one by one. I burned the image of their mockery into my mind, knowing no one here was on my side. I was utterly fed up with everything. If I raised my child in a home surrounded by such toxic people, it wouldn't just be me. They would hurt my child too. In that case, I would truly go through with a divorce. I wouldn't endure this any longer. I was the only one who could protect this baby, and at that moment I felt my baby's first kick. She was kicking softly, yet determinedly, against my belly. I gently placed my hand on my stomach. This baby is cheering me on in my decision. She's kicking to let me know she's on my side, even in this house. I wouldn't cry anymore. I stood up straight. All right, I'm filing for divorce. With those words, I turned toward the door to retrieve the divorce papers. In that moment, I felt the weight lift and my mind was clear and bright. I had finally said it. I was taking the first step out of this hell. As I walked back into the living room, Jason and Martha, standing by the door, let out startled, guttural sounds. Ouch! What do you think you're doing? Useless wife. Now you're slamming doors into us? Unbelievable. They were furious, but I just stared at them with cold, emotionless eyes. It wasn't worth wasting words on either of them. Fear and sadness were nowhere to be found in me anymore. All I could see was the road ahead. I retrieved the divorce papers, filled them out right there, and slammed them down in front of Jason. Jason's eyes widened in shock at my bold mood. Is this little performance making you feel better? You might think you've accomplished something, but let's face it, there's no way you can survive on your own. He scoffed and picked up the divorce papers. Then he turned to Martha and said, Don't worry, Mom. She's a helpless pregnant woman. She'll come crawling back, begging for forgiveness soon enough. The two of them laughed together as they spoke. But one of the relatives asked Jason, So, what are you going to do with those divorce papers? Jason, always full of pride, couldn't let it end with my move. Oh, I'll fill it out right here and now. You probably didn't think I'd actually sign it, did you? Glancing at me, he deliberately filled in the rest of the form, clearly trying to provoke me. When he looked up after signing, I knew I had won. I swiftly took the divorce papers from his hand. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I quickly checked the monitor. I welcomed the visitor inside. It was the lawyer I had been consulting with for months. The lawyer announced right there that a divorce mediation request had been filed. When it was revealed that I was earning $3,500 a month through my blog, social media, and recipe development, everyone in the room was speechless. Jason and Martha hadn't said a word since the lawyer arrived, their faces pale and full of unease. In this house, they had always been the main characters, the ones with all the power. But in the real world, the words of an established lawyer carried far more weight. We will submit 3 years' worth of audio and video recordings as evidence by the divorce mediation. She's been following my advice, carefully documenting everything in a way that holds up as evidence, so there's no escaping this. We can easily establish the physical and emotional suffering she's endured. Jason and Martha, clearly shaken, began trembling, but Jason, mustering the last of his strength, tried to argue. You never told me you were earning money. Keeping secrets like that is probably what caused all the problems in this family. Even if I had told you, you and your mother would have exploited me until the day I died, wouldn't you? My strong words left them speechless, yet Jason didn't give up. Come on, $3,500 a month? That must be an exaggeration. There's no way you can consistently make that much from home. You're just putting on a front. Someone like you couldn't possibly make that kind of money. He spoke with a condescending tone. I calmly showed them my bank statements, blog income reports, and recipe development contracts. As they looked through the documents, they finally realized I had multiple stable sources of income. My income is likely to keep increasing, but for you, it's only a matter of time before you get demoted, isn't it? After all, you know better than anyone how your behavior at work has been, don't you? Jason's face paled, and he wore an expression of regret. I decided to stay at my parents' house until the divorce mediation was finalized. I quickly packed my belongings and left the house. I thanked my lawyer multiple times, and they reassured me with a kind, let's get through this together. I got into my car and drove myself to my parents' house, where they were waiting for me. As I neared home, familiar and comforting sights unfolded before me. Stopping at a red light, I finally felt a deep sense of relief as if a weight had been lifted, and with that, tears began to flow. When I arrived, my parents welcomed me with tears in their eyes. "You endured so much, didn't you? From now on, your father and I will protect you." My mother said this as she pulled me into a tight hug. The baby in my belly kicked gently, full of life. I knew in my heart that I had made the right decision. A few months later, the divorce mediation between Jason and me began. Jason's lawyer likely fed misinformation by him, and Martha came in with an aggressive stance. They continued to make arguments laced with lies and fabrications. But once my lawyer presented the overwhelming evidence I had gathered, the situation completely changed. Not only the recordings, but also evidence of Martha's abuse and the relatives' harassment were laid out one by one. Jason and Martha were visibly cornered. The mediation extended over 3 sessions, and finally the judge delivered their decision. Jason is ordered to pay alimony and child support. Additionally, Martha is required to pay compensation for the emotional distress caused during the period of cohabitation. I felt immense relief at this decision. The two of them had seen me as weak, tormenting me within the invisible prison of our home. But now they were facing the consequences of their inhumane treatment. Martha and Jason, once surrounded by sycophants, found themselves completely abandoned. They were utterly isolated. With the divorce mediation concluded, I was now 7 months pregnant. The chaotic days were behind me, and I was enjoying a peaceful life under the care of my parents. The morning sickness had subsided completely. My doctor recommended regular walks, so I had taken to daily strolls. From the nearby elementary school, I could see children running on the track. Their faces lit up with smiles. Watching them, I gently rubbed my belly and spoke to my baby. "Look at those kids. They're doing their best, aren't they? Maybe one day you'll be running on a track just like this. I promise you'll never experience the pain I went through." I took a deep breath through my nose, letting the oxygen fill me as I walked, and my spirits lifted. A few months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. During labor, my parents were by my side the entire time. Their unwavering support helped me overcome any lingering fears. "You've grown into such a strong woman. We're so proud of you." My mother held my hand tightly as tears streamed down her face. Now, supported by my kind parents, I'm raising my daughter. Her smile is absolutely adorable, and my parents shower her with love and affection. Watching her sleep, I always think to myself, I will never let her go through what I endured. I'll raise her to grow up happy and carefree, just like my parents did for me. When I shared the news of her birth on my blog, it was flooded with warm congratulatory messages. My book saw multiple reprints, recipe development offers poured in from companies, and my monthly income surpassed $5,000. The joy of being able to live independently after separating from Jason was immeasurable. The bond with my followers grew stronger, and we exchanged advice and supported one another like a close-knit community. The community thrived, fueled by a shared desire to bring happiness to everyone. With my parents and my beloved child by my side, I vowed to build a warm and loving home. Meanwhile, my ex-husband's abuse behavior towards me became known at his workplace, leading to his demotion. His arrogant behavior in the office, already a concern, left him completely isolated after this scandal. Social media's reach was incredible, and his behavior at home became widely known among the company's business partners. As a result, he lost all trust and was abandoned by the upper management. It seemed unlikely that he would ever rebuild his career. As for my ex-mother-in-law, she had to pay my damages out of her late husband's inheritance, drastically changing her luxurious lifestyle. Known for her lavish spending and for buying loyalty with money, she now lived in poverty, with no one willing to help her. Even the neighborhood housewives, many of whom were my fans, completely ignored my ex-mother-in-law after learning what she had done to me. She was no longer invited to community gatherings, and people avoided her when she walked down the street. She reportedly tried to move away, claiming she couldn't stand her current life, but she couldn't even afford the moving costs. Both my ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband were now living lives of quiet shame. After everything settled down, my life became stable, filled with peace and happiness every day. My daughter grew quickly, blossoming into a curious and cheerful child. On weekends, the three of us, my parents, my daughter, and I, would go to a nearby park and join picnics together. My daughter would run freely across the grass, and we'd watch her with smiles on our faces. Meanwhile, I expanded my work on my blog, books, and recipe development. More and more followers would message me saying things like, "Thanks to you, I found the courage I needed." Hearing those words made me realize that the painful days I endured weren't in vain. In fact, overcoming those challenges had made me stronger. One of my dreams is to stand in the kitchen with my daughter once she's old enough. I can't wait for the day we bake together, laughing and sharing precious moments. My parents would watch us with joy, their faces lighting up at our bond. New opportunities continued to come my way. My publishers suggested I write a memoir based on my life experiences. This inspired me to share my story more broadly and encourage others facing similar struggles. As our family took this new step forward, we continued to grow and find happiness in every moment. I don't know what the future holds, but I am determined to protect this happiness with my daughter and my parents. The peace I fought so hard to attain, I'll never let it go. We'll continue to laugh together, support each other, and live our lives to the fullest. That is my goal for the rest of my life.